Welcome to 5 and 5 from the One Stop Co-op Shop, where I review 5 key elements of a game in about 5 minutes. I'm Michael Kelly, and today I'm looking at, hoo boy, Dark Souls the board game. No disclaimer for this one, I actually traded human interface for it, so yeah. I'm a big fan of the Dark Souls video games, but the board game has a pretty bad reputation. Is it justified? Let's find out and get to the list. I'm going to start off with a mix at my number 5, and that's the enemy turns and how the AI is structured and how they activate. On the positive side, I generally like the way the AI functions. They have these little behavior icons that determine how they move and how they attack, and it's pretty quick to resolve, and they feel a little bit different, not too much. But on the negative side, there's not enough variety between enemies, at least in the core game without expansions, and a bigger problem is the way enemies activate can really be a chore in 3 and 4 player games, because every enemy activates before each player gets a turn. So if you're the 3rd or 4th to act in a room, first of all, you might get killed before you go. Second of all, you might never act because the entire room is defeated. And in any case, it just kind of slows the game to a crawl and can make things pretty boring. But I do have a full-on pro for my number 4, but I'll give you a hint that it's the only one in the entire review, and that's the boss battles, which is generally the thing people speak about most positively for this game. When you fight a boss, they get a series of behavior cards, and you flip one each turn to see what they do, and the cool thing is these stay in the same order, except for some events that can mix them up. So you can really strategically learn the boss's pattern, and it's probably the thing in the entire board game that feels the most like the video game, and just kind of boss battling video games in general, in that you can really plan things out and kite around them and run away at the right time to avoid their big attack. It's a lot of fun and a very cool mechanic. But I'm back to a mix for my number 3, and that's the core upgrading and leveling system in the game. After each battle you win, you get a certain amount of souls, and you can go back and spend them to increase your character's statistics or to draw more items. And the positive side is building different builds with the items can be pretty fun, like being a quick person who dodge rolls all the time, or a magic user who blasts people from across the room. That's pretty neat. But the negative side is the only way you truly level up and kind of increase your abilities is through those items. The actual leveling of your statistics is pretty much a technicality in that if you play well in a standard game, you're going to level it all the way up anyway. And that also means that the characters don't really feel any different. If my character has a lot of spells and your character has a lot of swords and heavy weapons, then they feel different. But if you gave me all of your stuff and I gave you all of mine, we'd pretty much change into the exact same type of character on the other side. So there are some cool things here, but it feels too shallow and too undifferentiated and just kind of a weak effort overall. And I have a very similar mix at number 2, focused on the core tactical combat. And I will say this on the positive side, taking your turn is pretty fun. You get to spend basically as much stamina as you want to move around, and somewhere in there before or after you move, you can do 1 or more attacks, and you make choices with stamina about how hard you want to hit based on the enemy's defense. All of that is cool. But at the same time, the combat can become pretty formulaic. There isn't really enough going on in the rooms, so the movement doesn't always matter very much. So there's the potential, again, kind of like the upgrading, for something really cool, but except in the boss battles, it kind of fizzles a lot of the time. But none of those complaints compare to my number 1, a full-on con, the hugest problem with this game, which is that it is so grindy and repetitive, because you go through the exact same rooms with the exact same enemies that you've seen over and over again, 3 or 4 or 5 times based on player count, just grinding up to build up souls to get incremental increases that barely matter for your character, until you finally get to an interesting boss fight, and then you do it all over again if you survive, until you get to another interesting boss fight, and it could be a 5 or 6 hour slog if you try to play through the whole thing. Now, to be fair, there is a variant that doubles the amount of souls you get and halves the number of lives you get, so it basically cuts the time to play the game in half, but that brings it down to 2 or 3 hours, and you just gotta believe me, the game does not stay interesting for that long. It has maybe 45 minutes to an hour of interesting gameplay in it, tops, and then it just becomes drudgery. So overall, is the negative buzz about Dark Souls the board game justified? Absolutely. This game is a mess, and there are some nice little elements. I like the equipping, I like kind of the basics of how you take your turn, I think enemies activate in an interesting way, and the boss battles are really cool. The best best part about the game. But it is such a grind, such a slog. There are so many missed opportunities for more interesting choices and more variety in the play. So I really cannot recommend this one for basically anyone, unless you buy expansions, which will give you a bit more variety in the monsters and stuff. That'll improve it. But the big one is if you're willing to house rule. And man, there are so many wild variants and complete rewrites of the rules online. So if you want to dig into them, be my guest. You can definitely find a version of the game that's fun for you. But this is one of those ones where there are other great games out there that were designed great from the start. And this major stumble, I don't think personally is worth your time. But if you want to see the game in action and decide for yourself, just click the link that popped up to see my playthrough. Good gaming, and I'll see you at the next stop.